Sister Joan is an important faith leader and environmental leader in the state of New Mexico. She's very influential, and people are really empowered by what she has to say about the importance of faith communities protecting our natural resources for both present and future generations. And so I really wanted to sit down with Sister Joan and hear her talk about the power and importance of natural resource protection from that faith leadership perspective. So I hope that people will, as they listen, I hope as people sit and listen to this interview that they too will be inspired by how Sister Joan believes that environmental protection is a core part of faith leadership and her personal faith and the personal faith of many of the people that she knows and that she works with throughout the state. So, Sister Joan, thank you so much for meeting up today in your beautiful garden. I'm so grateful.
Yes, thank you for coming.
So can you just, for our filming, tell us your name and your organization?
Yes. My name is Joan Brown. I'm a Franciscan sister, and I am the Executive Director of New Mexico Interfaith Power and Light.
So how long have you been working with Interfaith Power and Light?
Interfaith Power and Light, we're part of a national group, and it's about 20 years old. Here in New Mexico, we've been at this for about 15 years. I lose track of time, but I helped with a bunch of other people start Interfaith Power and Light here in New Mexico.
Why did you start the organization in New Mexico?
Well, I was living here in New Mexico, and I was working with people of faith to care for creation, because it's not high, or wasn't high on the agenda of people of faith and faith congregations. And we got a call from Sally Bingham, who was the foundress of Interfaith Power and Light at the national level, saying, we need this to get going in New Mexico. And so the group of people I was with, we started it because people of faith were not addressing climate change. And they weren't, and of anybody that should be, it should be people of faith and faith communities. It's foundational to care for creation within all of the documents of major religious traditions.
So where on your life journey, your faith journey, did you develop this commitment to nature and to caring for the earth?
I began this commitment when I was born. I'm from a farm in Kansas, and so that's always been there, the, hands-on in the earth, outdoors. But my Catholic faith has also informed that. Growing up, we would have practices like blessing of the fields, of the seeds. We'd have rogation days. We'd pray for rain. We'd be processions outdoors. So my faith, the spirituality as a child even, was integrated into the natural world.
So broadly speaking, do you think that caring for creation is part of the belief system and the commitment of most faith communities, or is this something that you're working to grow and support?
Faith, or I call it spirituality, and earth and that connection is foundational, actually, in all major religious traditions, spiritual traditions. So it is something that some of them have forgotten, or as we've gotten more human-centered, but no, it's foundational. The Psalms speak of the wonders of God's creation. The New Testament scriptures talk about the birds of the air and, God taking care of them. As a Catholic and a Franciscan sister, Francis of Assisi, who lived hundreds of years ago, was kind of revolutionary, and he even brought it to the fore again in a new way by calling everything brother and sister. Like this wind that's blowing out here was brother wind, and the sun that's shining was brother's sun. The water flowing in the acequias was sister water. And so he moved this kind of sense that we're all intimately connected. Every element, every particle, every nanoparticle is brother and sister and is holy. So In more recent years, I've studied a lot about Thomas Berry and Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, and there are three basic principles in the whole cosmological realm, and those are interiority or essence of something, differentiation and diversity, and communion or community. And all three of those things flow within everything that exists. And when we're out of balance from that, that's when we get in, that's why we're in trouble as human beings, I believe, because we have lost sight of this very sacred essence within everything, and that the diversity is just a deep expression of the holy, and that we're all in this communion and community.
So that's so beautiful. So being here in the beautiful land of enchantment, right, in beautiful New Mexico, which is such a precious natural space, but with what you know about what's happening in New Mexico, what are your concerns for the earth, for the communities, for nature, the wealth of issues that what keeps you up at night as you can consider all this?
There's a lot of things that keep me up at night, and I just have to say that I feel very saddened very often, and as we sit here on this land that is indigenous land, and of the, pueblos of the people who've gone before, what has happened to this land of enchantment, this beautiful place, which was theirs, is theirs, and we are only guests, and we're not acting like guests. Many of us who work and live here say we are a sacrifice zone. And some parts of the state are more sacrifice zones than others. But it's because of legacy issues of uranium mining. It's because of pollution that continues to be there with the oil and gas industry. It's irresponsible things. It doesn't mean that we can't do business, but we have been doing business in this state at the cost of the natural world and all that's sacred, and the health of our communities.
Mm-hmm. So is there understanding, in my work often people say, what's the biggest threat facing the river, facing the environment? And I always say, well, there is no one biggest threat, right? It's an accumulation of harms and insults, and the biggest threat for one community is going to be different than for another. So I'm not going to ask you what you think is the biggest threat per se, but of the wealth of issues and challenges New Mexico is facing environmentally, which is the one that you find yourself spending the most time on, and why?
Yeah, well, actually, sometimes I say I eat, breathe, and dream climate change. Because climate change is a multiplier effect on all these other things that have been already going on in this state and with our brothers and sisters around the world. And some of the things we're doing in this state are affecting those brothers and sisters elsewhere. So climate change is huge. And while we've had droughts in the past, we are having unprecedented droughts now. While there have been fires in the past, we're predicted to have a lot more fires. We've had bark beetle die off. We have methane pollution in the southeast part of the state, which adds to problems of air quality that we already have, ozone and air quality, that affect people's health. So they have more asthma, more bronchial problems, more heart conditions, and the same with in the northwest part of the state. So climate change is really a multiplier effect. It's with us well into the future, and we have to start grappling with things in new ways, with a new worldview, a different worldview than what we've had. So we have to change how we've been doing things and how we hold all of this that we've been given as gift from the Creator.
Now, most people, when they talk about climate change, most people, very many people, but the scientists and the politicians, they mention carbon dioxide emissions. You're mentioning methane. Can you tell me why you specifically pulled out methane as your sort of the gas that you mentioned in the climate change context?
Right. So, usually with the people that I work with, we talk about pollution. There's different terms, but we're, ordinary people. I bring up methane because we have so much of that in our state because of oil and gas industry, and this has not been regulated. And methane itself is, in the short term, a major contributor to climate change, up to 86% or 86 times more potent than other pollutants, and in the short term it is still very powerful. So it's major in our state because of the oil and gas industry.
Well, now the oil and gas industry, right, they all tell us that they're a bridge fuel, that they reduce climate changing emissions, that they're part of the solution. Why do you think that fracking and shale gas and the fossil fuel industry, do you doubt that claim? And if so, why?
I like to talk about it framed in a different way, because we really do need to move to just transition. And that's very difficult in the rural areas of our state where there hasn't been other kinds of industries. There's traditional industries like in the Southeast, like ranching and farming and tourism and some of those things. But we need to be moving back into that and moving that along more. But at this point, there's a lot of poverty in our state, and we need to talk about real just transition. And so in order to do that, there has to be an understanding. We can't just kind of leave people off without, in the dust, so to speak. So we talk about moving into the future with renewables, for instance. We have a lot of sun here, we have a lot of wind. We talk about moving into the future with sustainable agriculture and seed saving and growing our own food and some of those elements. So, while we know we need to transition, it's not going to stop right now.
So can you talk a little bit about how climate change is affecting water resources in New Mexico?
Yeah, so water in this state, because we're in a high mountain, basically desert or semi-desert region, we really depend upon, for agriculture, for even our drinking water, and so do the creatures, the runoff from snow melt in the winters. And our snowpacks have not been consistent. Some winters, like, they've been very low, so that the forests are closed even part of the summer. And because we've had longer, warmer winters and earlier springs, the runoff comes very quickly and it's gone. And then, like this year, for instance, we had basically no monsoon. So we are in drought right now. And these kind of, while there have always been those kind of shifts and cycles, they are exacerbated now because of climate change and much more intense. And our warm season is much longer, and our winters are not as cold. So it's having a dramatic effect on us and will into the future. And then added to this are the stresses in the West of the fires and the smoke. And, I think I mentioned to you as we were beginning this whole concern. In the paper last week, it was talking about more than 100,000 birds, migratory birds killed here in New Mexico, died. And the scientists aren't quite sure why it happened, but they think it's a combination of drought and the fires. And the migratory birds didn't have maybe enough to eat. They made it to New Mexico. They were acting funny, weak, and they die. And the fires also might be affecting that. So we are this, as I said earlier, this vast communion of life and this web of life. So one thing is going to have reactions and affect everything else. And so it's so vital that we address climate change and find ways to work on this in adaptation, mitigation, but especially to change our hearts and our spiritual practices, our lifestyles, and public policy, to address this.
Mm-hmm. You had expressed a number of times also the importance of protecting nature for people, and just thinking of the climate crisis and the current COVID crisis. What's the connectivity that you see between the two and how the climate crisis is exacerbating the COVID crisis, and for whom?
Here in New Mexico, our folks that already have a compromised health system because of their bronchial problems or heart, that's exacerbated or even caused by some of these pollutants we have in the air, like methane and other volatile compounds in the northwest, the southeast part of the state, but in other parts of the state too, because this stuff does not just stay in one place, and other pollutants as well. So when we have something like COVID that is particularly attacks lungs and bronchial, those people who are most vulnerable are the ones who suffer the most first. And oftentimes those are people living in those rural areas, in our state at least. And for instance, we have had, really a huge number of Navajo, friends, brothers and sisters who have died and been sick in Navajo Nation. And as we're meeting here today, Navajo Nation has gone on to a 57-hour a weekend lockdown again because of COVID. And they were on lockdown for months. And it's and they're already suffering because of the pollution, and this is just adding to it. I also see that the COVID is kind of I don't want to say a test, but how we deal with this is an indicator, I think, of how we're going to deal with these crises that are going to continue to come, and with climate change, and how we address that, how we care for one another, how we look to creative and better solutions and into the future.
So, given the fact that the climate crisis is harming every aspect of the lives of the people of New Mexico, and you've talked about really some of the horrors and the impacts of the climate crisis. So what is it that you and Interfaith Power and Light and the communities that you work with, what are the solutions that you are seeking to advance to try to address this this challenge for present and future generations?
New Mexico Interfaith Power and Light, we work on several different kind of focuses. And one is a deep spiritual focus, because we believe that these challenges are enormous and huge. We can become very depressed, and we may not know how to go into the future, have the energy. That energy is going to come from a spiritual place. So we work on education and spiritual foundation, helping people lift that up in themselves. We also help houses of worship install solar, do energy efficiency, and promote local food. And then the final thing that we do is work to engage people in public policy change. And that can happen at all different levels.
I loved the name Forest of Bliss Initiative.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about what that is, and whether it's, from the climate context or the community context, the environmental context? It just seems like such a powerful and beautiful coming together of people, to help nurture nature.
Right. I love that title, Forest of Bliss, too. So Interfaith Power and Light works with all faith traditions. So one of them is the Sikh community. And the Sikh community this year, to celebrate the 550th anniversary of their founder, decided they were going to plant 550 trees here in Albuquerque to do that celebration. So we went to the first planting of 5 trees in a park, and was talking with the Sikh leader, and then there was a Jewish leader there, and we started talking. We said, we should make this an interfaith effort to help you with this, because it's a small Sikh community, and this is something we all should be doing, and the mayor also wants to plant trees. So we said, okay, we're going to work on this. And Manjit, who is with the Sikh community, one of the leaders, she said, well, I've been thinking we could call this a Forest of Bliss. Initially, it was going to be a forest, but it's not going to be a forest. It's a forest scattered throughout the city and in different places, in people's backyards and in some houses of worship, in parks. There may be one specific park with more of these trees. So it's an interfaith effort, working with the Sikh community, the Jewish community, the Muslim community wanted to plant a couple of hundred either, as well, in remembrance of some of their Muslim brothers and sisters who have passed. So that's what we're trying to do, is just plant these trees to address climate change, to create beauty, and to create community among one another as well.
Wow. It's really beautiful. When you're working with communities, or having your educational programming, all the good works that you do. Do you hear people talk much about the fact that they should or do have a right to clean water or clean air? Is this an expectation or a belief they have, or is it just not, maybe it's not part of the conversation? I'm just wondering if this comes up at all in the conversations you have with community members that are being impacted by contaminated water or air or other impacts.
Yes, very often that comes up. With the folks in the uranium mining belt, where there's legacy issues of uranium, they don't have clean water, many of them, and they suffer from health implications and effects. And so they say, yes, we do have a right. We should have a right to clean water. The folks in the Permian Basin suffering from oil and gas, yes, we have a right to clean water, to clean air, and not just us, but also the created world, God's creation, the sacred nature, around us as well, all the other creatures. And so we're just not taking care of things as we should.
So while people have this belief and this expectation, do you think that the government officials here in New Mexico, whether you're talking about the state legislature or the local town council, are they doing all that they should be doing or could be doing right now to protect that access to clean water and clean air, to cleaning up the contaminated soils, to addressing the climate crisis?
I think that our civic leaders are trying to do what they can, but there is much more that we need to do. And again, I just think part of it is shifting our worldview and how we do things, because we can't continue to do things the way that we have been doing them. And so, yes, so there's much more that we can do. They are trying to do the best they can. We also have just such limited financial resources in our state, and now with COVID, that's even increased. But we need to do a better job of this. We have to. The future is dependent upon it. I work with young adults and young people, and intergenerational justice is huge with climate change and with everything, whether it's the food, the water, the air, and then all of the creatures who are brothers and sisters as well.
So we've talked, you and I, Interfaith, Power and Light, and Green Amendments for the Generations, have talked about this idea of adding to the New Mexico Constitution what we call a Green Amendment, right? A constitutional right to pure water and clean air, a stable climate, and healthy environments. And just wondering if you can talk a little bit about what you interpret a Green Amendment to be, and what you interpret, or how you think a Green Amendment might have value added to the work of Interfaith, Power and Light, and environmental protection here in New Mexico. And I know that's broad, but yeah, you can go whatever path you feel comfortable with in speaking about that.
I think when I've talked with, and when my board has been really on board, so to speak, with this, but when we've talked about it, it rings true right away. Because within, as I said earlier, all these faith traditions foundationally have scripture or practices, spiritual practices, prayer, philosophies that say we need to be taking care of the natural world. It's a gift, it's a sacred gift from the Creator, or if we're Buddhist, it's a sacred gift as it is, and so are people. And so some of the laws that we have on the books at the federal level and in other ways really come at things from a legal perspective only. And some of it is protecting of industry and the polluters, but not from this landscape of, everything is sacred, and that we need to be caring for our health, for the environment. And so to make decisions with that in mind changes or shifts a worldview. And so we would hope, and faith people would hope, that then that would frame our work differently and maybe prevent some of the work that we have to do now, prevent it from having to do it, maybe.
Oh my gosh, can I just tell you, that is just like so spot on perfect, right? Like, I mean, that's the whole Yeah, well, not the whole. That is one of the fundamental values of a green amendment, as you said, is just to shift the worldview. So it's all about how do we prevent the harm first. So I just love, but you said it much more beautifully than I do.
Oh.
But I love that you see that shift in.
Well, we have to go there because we have to have, we have to be creating different structures and different policies and different things to change things. And if anything, COVID, the economic downturn, climate change, economic inequity and racial inequity, all of these things bring it to the surface. We have to change these structures, how we have been doing things, and that requires a shift in our consciousness and a shift in our perceptions of the world and how we relate in the world.
So one of the, we don't hear many people be actually vocally oppositional about a Green Amendment, and I think doesn't mean that they aren't there. It's just whether they want to go on record speaking about it. And I'm just wondering, so just thinking about imagining that somebody is going behind the scenes, opposing the idea of people having a right to clean water and clean air, a stable climate and healthy environments. Is there anything that you would hope to say to them to get them to reconsider and consider this as positive value added to all people, right? No matter who you are, as opposed to a negative?
Right. An argument that I can think of that people would probably jump on right away is we don't need any more regulations. We don't need any more laws. And I guess how I would respond saying this is not a regulation, this is not a law. If any law, it's God's law. And we should be acting this way anyway, caring for the environment and our health. And that this is for the children and for the future and for now and for our brothers and sisters. For, people of faith, we have connections all over the world. And right now I'm just thinking of brothers and sisters in Africa who are dying of famine because of a combination of the effects of climate and the COVID. And so we have to be getting at the ground level to really change some structures. And I don't think most people want to be having brothers and sisters dying or having the birds fall out of the air and die as well. But we have to do something, and we have to listen to each other as we do this, try to understand those other perspectives, but say, no, this is not another law, another regulation. This is how we need to be living if we're going to have a viable future. And if people are going to, and the creation is going to survive.
Do you think people realize that they actually don't have an enforceable legal right to a healthy environment here in New Mexico?
I would say a number of people, yes.
That they don't realize, or they do realize?
They do realize that they don't have. There's a lot of negatives there. But yeah, that people, because there have been so many fights for a healthy environment. And so it's realizing, why do I have to fight for this? So they know that they don't have rights.
This is a little bit of a different shift, and you've sort of answered this, but there's a difference between loving nature, caring for nature as part of your daily life, and rising up to champion nature, which is what you do. You are a champion for nature, you are a champion for people, and a connectivity between the two, at least the way I see it. And I'm just wondering if when you were younger, did you see yourself as becoming this powerful champion for the earth and for people and the connectivity between the two?
I tell this story sometimes, and I'll give an abbreviated form right now.
No, give it I love
Well, I have a sister who has Down syndrome. And so I tell this story that, we were in a circle with relatives once, and, her verbal skills are not very strong. So we were talking, and she was saying, excuse me, and nobody was listening. And she said, excuse me again, and nobody was listening. She said, excuse me, you're not listening to me. And I said, yes, what is it? And so she got to speak. I tell that story because my sister, from her birth, she's younger than me, has influenced me and I think my family, to work for justice and rights, because she didn't have education. People might say, you know, unkind things to her, and I'd say, oh, they're just staring at you because you're so beautiful. But with this story, I translated it and moved that to climate change and our earth. And our earth has been saying for a long time, as well as those who are most vulnerable and affected by climate change, you're not listening to me, you're not listening to us, you're not listening, you're not listening. And now it is almost beyond the time of listening. And so my personal life and the work that I do, the ministry that I do, are just kind of woven together, as in, I think, all of our lives, how that happens. So I feel like I've been very called by the universe, so to speak, by God, by, you know, everything, to do what I do, to live, try to live faithfully, and it's not perfect by any means.
That's really powerful. That's a really beautiful, powerful story. Really beautiful. I'm glad you told the whole story. I just want to say part of too, one of the, and this is a little bit different, but you know, one of the things that's been, and Bridget knows, that's been really important to me in the this is sort of off topic, but in these film segments, and in the For the Generations work, is including in diversity, the not just different races and ethnicities and income levels, but actually made a point of including children with Down syndrome, you know, others, and you know, and the first time I did that, it was because my son had a friend who's had younger sisters with Down syndrome, just beautiful. And I thought to myself one day when we were doing these films that that's another aspect of diversity, because I know also I've been at public hearings, and there was one where there was a paraplegic. His mother rolled in this paraplegic, and he couldn't really communicate himself, and he was in his wheelchair, and he was speaking at a public hearing where they were about to cut down the forest where his mother takes him every day to like refresh and renew and enjoy nature, and to try to come and testify and say, you know, you're going to cut down this forest for an expanding quarry. And so to me, it's really important that people understand that there are different kinds of diversity, and that's one. So that just really also resonates with me, because when I first asked to include Susan and her sister in the photos, their mother came up to me and said, Maya, thank you, because I was a little hesitant about asking. I didn't want to be, you know, but I thought, well, let me. And she said, thank you so much for doing that. She said, because when it comes to the environment, when it comes to outdoor things, we never see ourselves in those pictures.
Yeah.
So thank you for including our girls so they could see themselves.
Yes. Yes.
You know.
Yes.
Anyway,
Yes.
it's just.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a really powerful story that resonates a lot of ways with me.
Well, you know, I'm also reminded this too of Pope Francis in the encyclical Laudato Si on care of our common home. He talks about the throwaway culture, and the throwaway culture, you know, you can relate it to plastic being thrown in the ocean, or you can relate it to just spewing methane in the air, or to people in island nations that, oh, they can move because of climate change. They're not so important. Why do they live there anyway on an island? They could move someplace else. Or to those who are differently abled. And so I think that term throwaway culture is really important for us to really reflect on. And is this what we're called to be as human beings, as a human species? To be a throwaway culture of throwing away? And, you know, I don't think so. I don't think so. We have much more dignity as a human species than that. Yeah.
So one of the things I hear you talk so much about is the power and importance of faith and faith leaders for leading when it comes to care for the earth, the environment, people, and creation. And I'm just wondering, you know, just for you, how inspiring is it to be able to work with all these different communities of faith and see. I mean, you talked about the Sikhs and the Forest of Bliss and how they led that, and then others. And I think there's other initiatives that you've mentioned where it was a different faith group, a different religious group that sort of brought the idea to the fore. And I just wondering on a personal level how that has enriched you in your work and your messaging.
I just feel so blessed to be working with people of all these different faith traditions. I've learned so much. I'm humbled very often by how much I don't know, but just of the mystical within each of those traditions, the sacredness and the connections with the natural world, and the courage. Like we've been working with some faith leaders in the Permian Basin and addressing the oil and gas pollution and devastation of creation, et cetera, water and methane. And there are faith leaders there that came forth to speak and to lead and to draw others in, because this is not a popular or easy thing to speak of, these people that are affected down there, and it takes a lot of courage. So I'm really very humbled, and so I just feel all of these many people throughout New Mexico are just dear brothers and sisters of mine, and I feel very honored and very humbled to be connected with them.
So if New Mexico were to add to its constitution a green amendment that recognized not just the rights to pure water and clean air and healthy environments, but the right to a stable climate as well.
Yes, yes.
How do you think the passage of a green amendment like that could help New Mexico better address the climate crisis?
New Mexico, because we've been traditionally a state with less financial resources, and that means less human resources as well. If there are some safeguards or ways or attitudes that we have before we put laws or regulations or certain businesses or industry in place, that could save us a lot of energy, time, money, and protect the health of the communities here. So I see that could be very helpful. And we're going to have more of these challenges as we move deeper into climate change, and climate change as a multiplier effect on the challenges we already have living in this arid region.
Do you think that New Mexico is doing what it needs to do and should do to be a leader on the clean, renewable energy front at this point? You talked about the importance of that, but is New Mexico rising to the occasion in the way it could be?
You know, we are really trying to. The Energy Transition Act that was in our legislative session and passed in 2019, I think was a very an important step forward to move into just transition in some regions of our state, and to enhance and move forward with renewable energy. So I think we are trying to do some of that, but we need to do so much more, because this climate change is just moving very rapidly, and we can't do enough at this point. So we are trying to do this. We have solar, we're having more solar, more jobs with solar, wind as well. We really need to grapple with our water challenge, and in adaptation, mitigation, and how we're going to address that also. I mean, there's many, many things we need to look at. So I'd say we're working at it, but we need to work at it more.
How do you think that the level of fossil fuel extraction here in New Mexico, what message does it send to future generations, as well as other states across the nation, like Oregon, who right now are literally on fire?
Right. You know, I think it depends upon, and if you're talking about our state, I think it depends upon where you live in the state, because there are many young people who are actually working in the oil and gas industry because there are not other jobs that they can find. And so when I talk about this, like with my other national IPL colleagues, you know, I bring up the fact that the West is a big extractive region with oil and gas, but a lot of where that's being used is not out here. It's on the West Coast, not as much as it has been, but it's still there, but on the East Coast. Most people do not make this link who live in those large urban areas. They say, well, we need to stop the fracking, we need to stop this, we need to stop this. And I say, well, how do you heat your home? Well, we use gas fuel, or, you use different things in the East than we do. But we all in this country need to make those links and connections. And so then I say, well, what does just transition look like? You all have grown lots of industry in some of the urban areas, and it's all been dependent upon fossil fuels. And so what does just transition look like? There's been lots of, economic base generated there, and we have been an extractive state, and and that's part of colonialism, I think. So we need to, it's not a simple thing to grapple with. It's very complex and has all of these areas. And if we are going to come together as a country with the divisiveness that we have now, I think we have to begin to grappling with this in a more complex way.
Yeah, and one thing I want you to know, in Pennsylvania, the communities that are being literally fracked by
Right.
the industry, they are fighting, urging, and begging those, elsewhere in the country, stop asking for, using for, fighting for the fracked gas. You don't want the fracking in your state, but remember, you're sacrificing us because you continue to rely on fracked gas, fossil fuels. So that message totally resonates
Yeah.
with me. So with that, I'm going to ask if there's anything on climate change, on interfaith power and light, on a green amendment or constitutional environmental rights, however it is you would like to say it, that you think that we missed, or that you would want to make sure that you had an opportunity to say.
I think the only thing that I would say in conclusion is that this is a very challenging and sacred journey that we're all in this moment, and we really need to be doing it together with all the diversity that there is, and with a hope for some real change and shift. And that, I think, is what the Green Amendment is about. So, thank you.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.